find the body of a young Asian student face down on the bathroom floor.
She was naked, cord around her neck, her feet had been bound, and she had been beaten about the face fairly severely.
Police realize they are searching for a predator who may strike again.
There was tremendous fear. How could this have happened? Who would commit this kind of offense?
Along with police, there are those who chronicle the investigation up close, on film, on paper, and on tape. They are the public's first witness. Through their lens, they capture our darkest chapters of crime. Canada's largest city and one of the most multicultural centers in the world. In the heart of downtown lies the esteemed university. The institution is well known around the globe, each year attracting hundreds of international students.
People from all over the world come to study at the University of Toronto. It's a very busy area with a lot of people coming and going, and there's a lot of activity around the university.
For many international students, moving to a foreign country can be daunting. Many take comfort in the fact that the area around the campus is well known for being a friendly and secure place to live.
That would be a relatively safe area because not only do they have the Toronto police patrolling that area, policing that area, they have the University of Toronto police, and it was a relatively safe area.
But in the early 1980s, murder hits the academic scene when that same neighborhood becomes the hunting ground of a dangerous predator. October 1983. Deliana Hang is a 17-year-old student from Indonesia, living with her older sister, Mitty, in a high-rise apartment building near the campus. While Mitty attends the University of Toronto, younger Deliana is upgrading at a local college with plans of attending university the following year.
She was a foreign exchange student. She came from a fairly well-to-do family in Jakarta, and her parents, not unlike a lot of parents then and now, they thought that she could get a good education at the University of Toronto.
She was very friendly. She was extremely bright. She was an attractive young woman.
She was apparently a very good student according to all reports, and a typical kind of pure person who was doing very well at school.
When not in class, Deliana and her sister Mitty spend much of their spare time together.
Her sister was considered to be her best friend. They were about a year and a bit apart in age. Apart from living together, they would meet daily, sometimes for lunch, sometimes between classes, whenever they might meet at the library to study together. And so they were extremely close, even apart from the fact that they lived together.
Both sisters wear identical jewel-encrusted crosses on their necks, a gift from their mother in Indonesia. October 19th. The sisters wake and prepare for the day. For Deliana, it is a busy week. She is writing exams at her college.
She got up, went to her class, came home for lunch, and then, as was her custom, went to the university's main library, the Robarts Library, which is a couple of blocks away.
Deliana studies with her sister and a few friends, but by late afternoon, she packs her bag.
She decided that she needed to go home, and she was going to continue to study at home because she had some books that she needed to refer to in studying, and she didn't have them with her at the library.
Around Around 4 p.m., DeLeanna makes her way through the campus to the high-rise apartment building a few blocks away.
We know that immediately when she went to the front door and went into the building, she went to the mailbox area and retrieved some mail for her.
As far as we know, she went up the elevator to her apartment.
DeLeanna opens her mail and begins to write a letter back to a friend. She only gets a few lines written when she hears an unexpected knock at her door. 6 p.m. Both Mitty and a friend try phoning DeLeanna at the apartment, but their calls go unanswered. Assuming her sister must have gone out with the apartment's only key, Mitty spends the next couple of hours a few floors down in the same building. 10 p.m. There is still no answer to phone calls upstairs. Mitty and her friend decide to investigate. Strangely, she finds the door to the apartment unlocked, but gets no response to her greetings as she enters. Then, a few seconds later, a shocking sight.
She called 911. She was outside the apartment, sobbing hysterically. When the police arrived, it was obvious that her sister was dead.
DeLeanna is face down on the bathroom floor, with a cord from an iron wrapped around her neck. With signs of both sexual assault and murder, forensic expert Rod Spencer arrives on the scene with homicide detective Michael Boyd.
When you walk in to a crime scene like that, you must look at every single thing because it might be important to your case.
First things we do is to photograph the scene to ensure that the evidence remains in place, because once you start moving things about, you contaminate the scene. It appeared that she had been sexually assaulted. She was strangled. She still had a cord around her, electrical cord around her neck, and she had been beaten about the face fairly severely.
DeLeanna's feet have been tied with a knotted strap from a nearby camera bag.
Her arms weren't tied at all, but there were unusual marks around her arm.
We could determine from marks on the victim's wrists that she had been handcuffed. Clearly, they had been removed from her wrists and taken away from the scene.
More clues are discovered in the bedroom. Detectives note that clothing has been pulled from the closet, and traces of blood mark the corner of the mattress.
We also know that there were two tracks quite close together from the bedroom, leading out of the bedroom into the living room.
Near the front door, signs of a forced entry.
There was an interior door latch that was locked, or appeared to be locked. That had been kicked open. The door had been kicked open, and bits and pieces of those locking mechanism were on the floor in the hallway.
This was certainly not a consensual situation from the point of the suspect entering the apartment.
Detectives gradually piece together a likely sequence of events.
It's apparent that DeLeanna opened the door, but opened it with a chain lock on it. The killer forced the lock, broke it, and gained entrance to her apartment.
DeLeanna flees to the bedroom.
It seemed to me that at some point in time, DeLeanna tried to hide in the closet, and it was discovered, and the clothes were pulled down as she was being taken out of the closet.
DeLeanna is handcuffed and her legs are tied, rendering her defenseless against her assailant. After raping her, the attacker drags an injured DeLeanna out of the bedroom, leaving marks in the carpet.
We determined that they were the marks made by the suspect dragging the deceased from the bedroom, out of the bedroom, along the hallway in the living room.
The the killer forcibly moves DeLeanna to the bathroom before finally strangling her to death, a fact that puzzles the investigators.
We always wondered, during the investigation of the crime scene, what the reason was for her being taken from the bedroom, where she was obviously attacked and raped, to the bathroom, where she was ultimately found. And because of the violent nature of the attack and her ultimate death, one can only imagine how terrible that must have been for her.
I had investigated and been involved in hundreds of homicides, but this was, to me, was rather tragic in the sense that she was so young. And from my experience, I think it registered that this wasn't your normal homicide, it wasn't a domestic situation.
A dangerous sexual killer is now on the loose, putting all female students on the university campus at risk.
This is the kind of thing that brings fear in any community and changes the way people actually live their lives.
October 20th, 1983. In the middle of the night, detectives in Toronto are on the scene of the brutal rape and murder of 17-year-old student DeLeanna Hang. The body is removed for autopsy, while bed sheets and articles of clothing are secured for laboratory tests. In a nearby apartment, the victim's sister, Mitty, is consoled by friends. Her parents, back in Indonesia, learn the terrible news that one of their daughters is dead. The killer is still on the loose. By morning, local media is on the scene as Toronto police set up a command post inside the apartment building.
We focused on conducting a canvass of the building to see if we could contact anyone who may have seen the victim come home that day, or any person in the building at the time that may or may not have looked unusual.
Other officers search the entire building.
But we had to check the stairwells, the underground garage. All the garbage containers on the street and around that area had to be checked because there was a possibility that the suspect may have taken a towel with him or a face cloth that may have had some blood on it or some other physical evidence.
Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, forensic expert Rod Spencer dusts for fingerprints, hoping the killer has been careless in covering his tracks.
Usually in crime scenes, you know what to fingerprint and what not to fingerprint. You look for those objects that people would normally handle, such as doors, doorknobs, telephones. In this particular case, there were books strewn about, dirty dishes everywhere, so we had to fingerprint everything. We couldn't leave anything unturned.
Police dusted the entire apartment and obtained a whole series of unknown fingerprints, which wasn't unusual for a student who would have friends over.
Each fingerprint needs to be followed up on and either eliminated from suspicion or investigated in more detail. Early on, one set in particular catches Rod Spencer's attention. They turn up on a drinking glass near the sink.
Normally when you grasp a bottle or a drinking glass, you leave your fingerprints in a horizontal position. These fingerprints were in a vertical position at the edge of the glass, which was rather unusual. So this raised to me some interest, speculating that this potentially could be the suspect who went to the refrigerator after committing the crime, thought that he was smarter than the police, and that by handling a glass at the top that he wouldn't leave his fingerprints on the glass. So I paid particular attention to this glass and ensured that it was protected.
With dozens of fingerprints now to identify, police interviewed DeLeanna's sister Mitty to get the names of people who may have spent time inside the apartment.
The background of the victim was very important to us. We had to understand who might be a suspect. Were there people that she hung around with, boys or men that she hung around with? Was there anyone in her life that might be a suspect because of a stalking incident? And although she was quite social within an environment of studying. She had no boyfriends, did not associate with any boyfriends, did not date any boys.
With no known enemies, police believe the murder was likely committed by someone outside of her social circle, making the case all the more difficult to solve.
It became more and more apparent this was a stranger-to-stranger homicide that we were going to be dealing with.
By noon on October 20th, news of the murder is circulating in Toronto, sending shockwaves across the busy university campus.
Well, there was fear. There was tremendous fear by people that lived in the neighborhood. Certainly women, but not limited to women. Men and women who have children in the area were concerned equally about, how could this have happened? Who did this? Who would commit this kind of an offense?
That same day, new information surfaces at the morgue. The strap around Deleana's legs is removed, and the knot used to tie it is examined.
We wanted to know, what was that knot from? Was that a special knot?
We were able to find an expert tell us more information regarding this knot.
And we found that it was consistent with a martial arts knot.
It was tied by a person who was a karate expert.
They also learned that Deleana's jewel-encrusted cross, identical to the one worn by her sister Mitty, is missing.
We couldn't find that anywhere in the apartment, and it certainly wasn't around her neck when we conducted the post-mortem examination, and that it had been taken away from the crime scene.
Police now believe the killer is possibly a martial arts aficionado in possession of both the cross necklace as well as the handcuffs likely used to bind Deleana's wrists. At the same time, lab tests turn up traces of the killer's semen on clothing taken from the crime scene. Although DNA testing is not available in 1983, police discover that their suspect not only has type A blood, but he also belongs to a unique subset known as type A secretor. Type A secretor blood is possessed by less than 3% of the population. Armed with this valuable information, police begin to interview male friends of the victim, as well as potential suspects in the area.
In cases like this, you can generate 500 or 1,000 names by various means. So what we did was get a list of the names of the people who have been in the apartment. We had the public contact us, phoning in names of people that they thought we should consider persons of interest. And you have to look at all of this information, all of these names, with a view to eliminating people from suspicion, or conversely, developing that person as a greater suspect and with more evidence.
Along with submitting fingerprints, many of those interviewed provide saliva and blood samples as well, which are each tested for type A secretor status. One name at a time, the police list shrinks as both biology and alibis clear people from suspicion. At the same time, most fingerprints in the apartment turn out to belong to close friends who regularly visited the victim. But one mystery set of fingerprints remains unaccounted for. The same ones found on the drinking glass near the sink. Some detectives are now sure they must belong to the killer. In what may be their only hope of tying a name to the unknown prints, police prepare to look through criminal records on file for a possible match. In 1983, there is no computer database and searches must be done manually.
So it's very labor-intensive searching the crime scene fingerprints against all of the people who would have been arrested and on file. And at that time, we're talking in the order of 3 million potential fingerprints that we're searching it against by a manual system.
Investigators will spend 2 weeks combing these records before making a crucial discovery. In the meantime, local media coverage reminds the public that a dangerous killer is still on the loose. October 25th, 1983. In Toronto, Ontario, almost a week has passed since the murder of 17-year-old Deleana Hang. a memorial service for the slain student draws a large crowd. The following day, police examine a copy of the guest book from the service, looking for any potential leads. Although investigators know DeLeanna's killer has a rare kind of type A blood and may well be a martial arts expert, they have yet to connect a name to the violent crime. Many pin their hopes on identifying a pair of mystery fingerprints found on a glass at the crime scene.
It was an educated guess that we were dealing with a right index and a right thumb because of the positioning on the glass.
And that set of fingerprints then was being searched against our criminal data bank, or database for fingerprints.
Although every fingerprint is unique when it comes down to its finest details, many are categorized into general groups according to broad common patterns.
So out of potentially 2 million fingerprints, right index fingers, we can narrow it down now to 10,000 just by breaking it down to the type of pattern. Then once we've done that, then it's a matter of looking at those unique characteristics within the minutia. The minutia really is what identifies your finger or makes your fingerprint different than my fingerprints.
While officers continue to comb through fingerprints, others canvass the general public for any overlooked clues. They take a mobile police unit along the route DeLeanna took home before she was killed, hoping to jog the memory of potential eyewitnesses.
We continued to work with the media and continued to keep the investigation alive and tried to get our messages out with the assistance of the media to the public. And that had to do with urging people to come and phone us who may have been in the area at the time and may have made observations of either the victim walking home, somebody following her home. We did a complete canvass of the area to speak with anyone who might be able to provide us with information.
At the same time, detectives break the seal on the crime scene and do another walkthrough with the victim's sister, Mitty, hoping she can spot some small detail they may have missed. Little of value turns up. By early November, frustration is setting in as tips from the public dry up and no new leads surface. But it is just then, deep in Canada's collection of criminal records, that police suddenly get their biggest break to date. Investigators zero in on a set of fingerprints that seem to match the ones found on a drinking glass at the crime scene.
The fingerprints were identified to a man by the name of Tien Poh Su. That was his proper name, Asian name, but he was known in the community as Robert Su. In Canada, he called himself Robert.
It certainly provided a key suspect right away.
His name had never surfaced in our investigation up until that point. But once we had his name and knew that his fingerprints were on that glass, we then opened up an investigation focusing in on Robert Su as a suspect. And we started to look at his background. We started to try to learn more about who Robert Su was. Where did he live? What did he do? Did he go to school? Did he work? His habits.
Police discover that 20-year-old Robert Su is originally from Malaysia. He is currently married and lives in Toronto. He arrived in Canada 3 years earlier on a student visa that has since expired. He has a keen interest in martial arts.
When we checked Robert Su's criminal record, we found out that he actually had an arrest and he was before the courts on a property crime as opposed to a violent crime, which would include assault, sexual assault or homicide or any kind of crime like that. So we weren't drawing any conclusions about whether or not he would do such a thing, but certainly his fingerprints gave us strong reason to suspect him. And at that point, we had to carry on, either eliminate him from suspicion or move on and develop him as a suspect.
They kept Tien Poh Su under surveillance for a period of time to see what his habits were. He didn't know he was being followed. and they discovered that, amongst other things, he was very religious about working out and improving. He was a bodybuilder, very conscious of his appearance, and would go 2 or 3 times a day to a local gym.
I knew Robert through the health club, and he liked to come to the gym. A regular member, would show up each day and work with the weights. He started working out, gaining weight, gaining muscle, and building himself up. And I don't think anybody had any sense, oh, we got to be afraid of this guy in this gym. I mean, he didn't have any air at all like that.
Detectives put together a folder containing Robert Su's photo alongside photos of 23 other anonymous Asian men. The folder is shown to Deleana's sister Mitty. None of the faces are familiar. When Robert Su is specifically pointed out, Mitty again draws a blank.
We inquired from her sister and her girlfriend about whether Robert Su was part of their social circle. And no one in their social circle recognized Robert Su at all.
But police remain wary about alerting Robert Su too early on what is only circumstantial evidence. On its own, a fingerprint in the Hang sisters' apartment doesn't prove that Robert Su is a murderer.
They know he had been in that place, or at least the glass has his fingerprint. The glass was in her place. The problem is, maybe he'll come up and say, well, yeah, I met her one day and I just went and had a drink at her place.
In reviewing how he reacted to the police the last time he was arrested and charged, we realized that he wasn't going to be very cooperative with police. And we needed to have some cooperation from him in order to either eliminate him from suspicion or develop him as a suspect.
Police decide to try an undercover operation to secure more evidence.
One of the things that we knew and needed from him was a sample of his blood. And we couldn't be certain he would refuse to cooperate and provide his blood, even though he might not have been responsible. Knowing that Robert Su was a bodybuilder and was very interested in his appearance, we decided that the ploy in this undercover operation was going to be that we would try to get a blood sample from him and try to do so using a ruse, as we call it.
They enlist a young man named Gary Eschweiler, a Toronto police officer with a large muscular build.
Robert Su was heavily into working out and bodybuilding, and they just wanted to try to get somebody who could work out at the same gym, try to get a little closer to him, and at that time they felt that I would fit into the gym, and with any luck I could possibly befriend him.
Should Gary connect with Robert Su, he is to plant the idea that a special weightlifting diet supplement obtained from a doctor is the real secret behind his large muscles.
Gary was asked to go in and befriend Tien Poh Su at the bodybuilding club under the pretext that if he was to provide some blood samples, that he too could look like Gary Eschweiler in terms of bodybuilding.
And as unlikely as that sounds, and many people said it wouldn't work, we went with that.
November 14th, 1983. Posing as a civilian, Gary Eschweiler gets a membership at the same Toronto gym used by Robert Su.
I had no idea that Gary came in specifically to focus in on Robert. No idea whatsoever.
I was a little nervous because I didn't really have much of an opportunity to try to build any type of background. I was just put right into the middle of something that was a very dangerous situation.
If Robert Su is truly guilty of murder, police hope his vanity will outweigh his criminal caution, possibly providing them with fresh evidence in a horrible crime. November 14th, 1983. In Toronto, police monitor the movements of Robert Su, a suspect in the murder of 17-year-old student Deliana Hang. While Su's fingerprints were found at the crime scene, police hope an undercover operation will give them more evidence, ideally in the form of a blood sample. Dressed as a civilian, Gary Eschweiler works out at Su's local gym.
He was very well-defined. His muscles were well-defined and more well-defined than Robert Su. And that's what we were looking for as an undercover officer. Someone who would be bigger and stronger than Robert Su and would garner the respect that we thought was needed in order to make this undercover operation work.
Su keeps to himself, forcing Gary to use a stunt to show off his superior strength and get the suspect's attention.
I ended up loading all the plates that they had in the gym on the bench. And after I lifted it, it was a little over 400 pounds. The bar started to bend when I put it back. So with that, a few people started laughing, and that gained his attention.
As hoped, Robert Su finally approaches.
He was interested in knowing, how this officer worked out, how he got so big and strong.
Su, of course, had no idea that he was an undercover police officer. Eschweiler would tell Su that in addition to using the weights, he had a secret formula that he would take to improve his muscle tone. But he told him that he was getting some pills from a doctor, had been taking these pills for some time, and it really pumped him up, so to speak.
With the seed planted about the bogus weightlifting supplement, Eschweiler tries to cement his new friendship, agreeing to have dinner with Su. That evening, as they walk the streets, Su makes observations about good businesses to rob, as if feeling out the undercover officer's attitude towards crime.
And there was no doubt he was trying to recruit me as being one of his thugs.
The two men take in a martial arts movie that practically mirrors the crime police are investigating.
He sat up in his seat, and especially for a calm fella who was sort of always had a quiet disposition, he seemed to be a little bit more involved in watching that.
The reaction of Robert Su to this suspect in the rape scene left the undercover officers with the impression that he enjoyed it.
Eschweiler feels he has gained Su's confidence. By morning, the ploy begins to pay off. At the gym, Su approaches Gary once again. But this time, as police had hoped, he wonders if he could try the special diet supplement that Gary claims is the secret behind his large physique.
Robert Su says to him, well, he'd love to be able to get muscles like that. And the policeman said, well, here's what you do. You give me a little bit of your blood, and I'll take it to the doctor, and he'll examine exactly what you need, and he'll give you the right potion.
He seemed very hesitant about that, and I continued to suggest to him that that would be the only way for him to gain the strength and the size that he seemed to be intrigued with.
Robert Su's vanity eventually outweighs his caution. In the locker room, Gary goes after what police hope is more evidence against a suspected killer.
Gary then said, well, I've got this kit that my doctor gave. And so he provided that sterile kit and actually watched Robert Su as he lanced his own finger and dropped his own blood onto this gauze.
He made several comments to the fact that, are you sure you're not a policeman?
The blood sample is delivered to the lab. But as police wait for results, Su's paranoia grows. He consults with the manager of the club.
And I was closing up gym, and he told me, is it possible that if somebody took a sample of your blood that they could take it to their doctor or chemist or whatever, and from doing that, be able to determine what would be the best vitamins or the best steroid or the best substance that he could use in order to get bigger. I didn't think so. I hadn't heard of that. That sounds sort of silly. And that's when Robert really, he came on and said, I think Gary's a police officer. He's a police officer. I don't know, Robert. No, he was very agitated at that point.
Police fear Su might do something drastic. Eschweiler returns an identical fake sample of blood to the suspect in an effort to calm his fears.
I gave him back the blood sample. I said, I don't think you trust me. Words to that effect. And I don't appreciate it. Here's your blood back. At that time, he held the sample up and he said, words to the effect of, this is how they catch killers, which struck me as a very unusual comment to make because it was such a blatant, direct comment on the crime at hand. I knew that the game that we were playing was for keeps.
By morning, police have the results they had hoped for. Robert Su has type A blood, the same type of blood as the killer. Although the tests are inconclusive as to whether he is also a type A secretor, a fact that would bolster their case further, investigators decide to make their move.
We decided it was time to bring Robert Su in for an interview should he wish to assist in that interview.
November 17th, 1983. As Su enters the gym for his daily workout, detectives arrest him for the murder of Diliana Hang. He promptly denies any involvement in the crime.
It was a jigsaw puzzle that is a circumstantial evidence case was starting to take place, but there were still pieces missing.
While detectives prepare to interview their prime suspect, other officers secure a search warrant for his apartment. Police know they still need to turn up more evidence if they are going to put a suspected killer behind bars. November 17th, 1983. In Toronto, police have 20-year-old Robert Su in custody for the murder of Diliana Hang. Although a fingerprint connects him to the scene of the crime, and a blood sample is consistent with the type carried by the killer, investigators need more evidence to bolster a circumstantial case.
He really didn't admit to anything. Well, why would his fingerprint be in the crime scene? And how could you have your fingerprint on a drinking glass and a dead body there?
While detectives press Su for a confession, officers execute a search warrant at his apartment, alerting Su's wife to her husband's arrest. In the home, more potential evidence. Amidst martial arts magazines and pornography, police find a pair of handcuffs similar to the ones used in the murder.
So those handcuffs appear to be consistent with the handcuff marks around Diliana's wrist.
Moments later, they turn up a jewel-encrusted cross, just like the one taken from Diliana's neck.
When they questioned Su's wife about the jewelry to ascertain whether it was hers or not, she said it was hers, but it had been given to her by her husband, Su, a few days after what turned out to be the date of the murder.
Also in the apartment, we found a knot that was tied around the refrigerator door handle. And that knot was very similar in configuration to the knot tied in the camera strap around the ankles of the victim.
The search turns up another telling piece of the puzzle, a book that reads like a how-to manual for committing rape and murder.
And it was a book that was borrowed from one of the libraries in Toronto, and it was called The Rapist File. And in that book, it's a series of stories by convicted rapists of how they committed their acts and why they did certain things and how they got caught.
One of the book's case studies describes how a man received sexual pleasure by strangling his victims in front of a full-length mirror. The sick fetish may explain why DeLeanna was moved from the bedroom to the bathroom before being killed.
In the bathroom, that's the only place in the apartment where there's a mirror. And so if he was going to take the victim before a mirror, it had to be the bathroom. And that's exactly what happened.
Back at the police station, Su seems to betray his guilt when told of the discoveries in his apartment.
My partner and I told him that other police officers had recovered the cross and the handcuffs. And it was at that point, after hearing that, he broke down and cried as a result of that.
Police seize a chance to get more evidence.
At that point, I was able to hand him a napkin that was clean. And he wiped the tears from his eyes, and he wiped his nose on this napkin.
The napkin is taken to a police lab for testing, where it bolsters the blood evidence, proving once and for all that Robert Su is a type A secretor, like the killer. Only a small percentage of people have similar blood. News of a breakthrough in the case sweeps through Toronto.
Following the arrest of Robert Su, we reported to the media that we'd made the arrest and solved the case. And I think that brought some measure of comfort to the people that lived and worked in that area, who up until that point knew that there was a killer out there on the loose but didn't know who it was.
It was a real victory for the police. A lot of times it's grunt work and just following along, and the evidence is there, but this was where they really went out, and it was a very good piece of imaginative piece of work.
March 18th, 1985. In an Ontario Supreme Court, Robert Su stands trial for the murder of 17-year-old DeLeanna Hang. The victim's sister, Mitty, is in attendance, along with her parents from Indonesia.
And I recall them sitting in the front row, and I recall thinking how difficult and tragic it must be to sit through a trial of this nature, to see the man that was accused of killing your sister or daughter sitting there.
Robert Su pleads not guilty.
His position was as it was at the trial. He did not do it.
But from their perspective, the prosecution feels that they have a solid case. Along with the fingerprint at the crime scene, police put forward the discovery of the jeweled cross in the suspect's apartment. Although similar crosses are not uncommon, a tool expert proves the one in question is identical to the one still carried by the victim's sister, Mitty. Both were purchased in Indonesia by the mother of the two sisters. The court also learns of the undercover operation at the gym where Robert Su worked out.
That was that was unique, something we'd never seen done before, particularly because of the way they got this guy's blood sample. I mean, the whole thing turned it into a very unique case.
On March 27th, 1985, after only 3 hours of deliberations, a jury finds Robert Su guilty of the first-degree murder of DeLeanna Hang.
As I recall, as he was being let out, he shouted out to whoever would listen, "I did not kill DeLeanna Hang. I'm innocent." And he was let off.
He was taken away in handcuffs, and he's been in jail ever since. I don't think families ever forget what happens in violent cases like this, but I think seeing that justice was done is an important step in attempting to bring closure after these terrible cases where people are murdered.
Despite his pleas of innocence, Robert Su eventually confessed in prison to his horrible crime. Although justice can't bring back DeLeanna Hang, many today believe that Su's timely arrest in 1983 may well have spared the lives of other innocent victims.
Maybe they stopped a guy who was going to be a Picton, a guy who was going to be a rape killer of many women, young women.
This was probably the best investigated police situation that I've encountered in almost 30 years in this business.
If you wanted to point to an ideal case and how things come together, that would be the case.